Thank you, Linda, and welcome to everybody who joined this technical session. I'm very pleased to hear and to be here and to share with you this presentation, some of our the result of our job, our evaluation of an important task for the compliance with the new Annex 1 as in general for sterile manufacturers. Hi, as already Linda introduced me, I'm Alessio Rosati. I'm a biologist. I'm a PhD in genetics, and just as my brief background, I've been working in a sterile manufacturing company here in Italy for about 12 years as a sterile assurance manager, so involved in all the aspects that are related to the control and the protection of a sterile manufacturing process. I am in PQE as a PQE consultant and pharmaceutical, mainly pharmaceutical, but not only pharmaceutical consultant since 2018. And I'm currently the responsible for the sterility assurance projects. And obviously, in the last 2 years, we've been mostly involved in projects related to the new incoming, now already issued new Annex 1 and the compliance and the project for getting full compliance with this new document that, as we will see during the presentation, is a very challenging revision for the sterile manufacturers. So here we are. Today I will share with you some consideration about, let's have a quick look to the agenda of this presentation. First of all, we will have an overall look to the new revision, the new document of the Annex 1 from the European GMP documentation for sterile manufacturers. So what are the hot points and the new requirements that are included in this new version of the document? And then we will focus on the contamination control strategy. That is one of these new improvements, one of these new requirements. That is maybe one of the most challenging new requirements from this new standard. We will see the main aspects that the contamination control strategy should have, and some of the most appropriate approaches to design a contamination control strategy, and going deeply how it can be developed, how it can be designed. This document, this high-level document, unfortunately, there are no clear and specific and technical guidelines in how to develop this document from the European agency. But we have some indication that we can collect from the Annex 1 to have a clearer idea on how to design and develop this document, and I share with you some consideration about these aspects. And finally, which are the main challenges in doing this work, in this task, the design and development of a contamination control strategy? But on the other hand, what are the opportunities? What can bring us this task, this development exercise? So, starting from the very starting point, from the new Annex 1, after a long period of wait, finally the new revision of the Annex 1 was released on last August. So it is quite new, quite fresh, even if the draft version has been shared with everyone who wants to review it for a long time. And the very first draft was released in 2017. And then there was a long period of revision and adjustment of this draft that leads to a high number of different revisions. Now we have the final version that is issued. The previous version was released in 2019. So from a certain point of view, we can say that it is very long ago, taking also in consideration that in the meanwhile, from the 2009, a lot of different news on quality and technological aspects arises. So quality management system principles were improved in the meanwhile. The technologies that are aimed at protecting the process and the products during sterile manufacturers are highly improved during this period, and also the development of new microbiological methods that are defined as alternative because they are aimed at shorten the period for the to get the final results have been developed. All these aspects are now included and at least cited or recommended at different levels in the new Annex 1, in the new revision. Just to have a brief comparison between these two versions of the new Annex 1, the older one and the current one, just to give you a hint about the extent of this revision and the extent of the news and improvements. The older version was a quite light document of about 16 pages. The new one is 58 pages, so more than 3 times the respect to the older one. But more importantly, about 100 paragraphs in the new document, in the new revisions, have no reference at all to the previous version. So there is an important portion of this new document that is totally new. On the other hand, we have 14 paragraphs of the previous version that are not present in the new document. So they were totally deleted and rewritten in a totally different way. And finally, only 40 paragraphs from the previous versions are still the same in the new document. So you can have an idea from this point of view how this document, the new Annex 1, has changed, shifting from the previous version to the new one. One important news in the new version of the Annex 1 is that the scope is now extended optionally also to non-sterile products. In the very first paragraphs, it is specified that the requirements contained in the new Annex 1 are specifically referred to sterile manufacturing. But in case a manufacturer have a process, a non-sterile manufacturing process that is exposed to a significant risk of microbiological contamination, the principles reported in the new Annex 1 can be applied also to this kind of manufacturing process activities. So it is even it is an option. It is just a recommendation. It is an important news about the scope of the Annex 1. Going in deep, if we want to identify the most impacting, the most important news that we can find in the new Annex 1, we can list at least these aspects. First of all, as a general principle, as a general consideration, the pharmaceutical quality system, there is a strong emphasis on the use of risk management principles for the definition and the design of all the aspects related to the quality management, the quality system of a sterile manufacturing. The use of effective root cause investigation, to evaluate and investigate non-conformities, for example, and for the identification of corrective and preventive actions. So from this point of view, the new Annex 1 requires a strong base of quality management system for the design and management of sterile manufacturing. Quality risk management is another aspect that is strongly emphasized in the new Annex 1. There is a clear and global acceptance of all the ICH Q9 principles for the risk management. And it is important to stress that risk management principles are now requested to be applied for almost all the aspects related to sterile manufacturing. So all the different strategies, all the different plans and decisions must be based on objective risk assessment exercise, and must be based on the principle here reported for quality risk management. So a sterile manufacturer must be aware that from the very little specific aspects to the general strategy for the definition, for the design of a sterile manufacturing process, all must be based on the risk management principles. Another important and for long time waited improvement and news is the recommendation for the use of new technologies and methods, mostly related to the protection of the sterile process and the sterile products. So the barrier technology. There are dedicated sections where these technologies, the implementation of this technology is highly recommended, and the management of this barrier technology is defined in details in terms of preparation, decontamination, testing for their effectiveness, and so on. And also, personnel is one of the section of the new Annex 1 that is mostly improved. There is a strong emphasis also about the qualification and training of the personnel that is involved in sterile manufacturing activities. And also there is a new requirements for a disqualification plan. So sterile manufacturers are requested to define criteria and modalities to disqualify a sterile operator in case his behavior becomes a significant risk of contamination for the process. And last but not least, the Contamination Control Strategy document. This is our main topic today, because as I already said, this is a brand new requirements from the European authorities, and it is a challenging task because it's a very it is a document that must include a lot of different aspects, as we will see, and they must be managed with an holistic approach that must include all of them and must evaluate all of them. But let's go through. So what is a contamination control strategy? The contamination control strategy, when we talk about sterile manufacturing, is intended to be a facility-specific approach, and it is aimed at holistically assess all the contamination risks that can have a potential significant impact on the sterility assurance of the process and the products. So they must be assessed and evaluated all together, taking into consideration all the processes and the products that are manufactured in a specific facility. The contamination control strategy must evaluate must identify all the contamination measures that are currently in place. And when I say all, I really mean all. From the, we will see, it is a very long list of different aspects, from engineering measures and design, equipment management, procedural system, and so on. So the containment measures that constitutes the global contamination control strategy are a lot of different aspects, and they must all identified, described, and evaluated for their effectiveness. So in order to have a clear feedback about their actual effectiveness in protecting and assuring the sterility assurance of the products. And in case some gaps are identified related to the effectiveness of these measures in place, the contamination control strategy should enable us to define and identify the most appropriate corrective and preventive actions to be implemented in order to optimize the general contamination control strategy. And it's all a lot of good words, but going in details, going in deep, how can it be done? How such a huge document can be designed and prepared? Because, as I said, it must include a lot of many different aspects, a lot of many different measures in a high-level document. So, to partially answer to this question, let's have a look at what the new Annex 1 tells us about this document, the Contamination Control Strategy. So let's focus to some specific paragraphs of the new Annex 1 where some specific indications are given to us. First of all, the contamination control strategy should be implemented across the facility. This is important. So it should evaluate all the facility, all the different areas and departments that is differentially involved in the sterile manufacturing activities, and should define, identify all the critical points, all the aspects that have a significant impact on the sterility assurance of the final products, and assess the effectiveness of all the control and monitoring measures. So it is not enough to list and identify all the control and monitoring measures. It is important to assess their effectiveness. Then, another important aspect to clearly define, clearly focus on the specific risk of contamination we are talking about. Because when we talk about contamination risks, we eventually may include many different risks that have different natures and aspects and dynamics. So it is important what the new Annex 1 tells us about these aspects. The risk of contamination that must be assessed and addressed in the contamination control strategy is the microbial, endotoxin, and particle contamination. So from this point of view, other kinds of contamination, like for example cross-contamination, physical contamination, are out of scope for the contamination control strategy as intended by the new Annex 1. This is very important because different types of contamination have different sources, different dynamics, different routes. So it is important to focus on the specific classes of risk we are talking about to have a clear assessment of the risks and a clear assessment of the effectiveness of my containment measures in place. And as already we said, risk management principle must be applied for the evaluation of the contamination control strategy. It is important to include and to apply the risk management principle in this evaluation and in the very structure of this document. Finally, the CCS, as any other quality documentation and risk management documentation, must undergo an ongoing and periodic review. So it must be intended and designed as a living document that can be and must be periodically reviewed and re-evaluated for their effectiveness and their composition. So here, focusing on these few paragraphs, we already have many important hints about what the contamination control strategy should be and how it should be meant and designed. So taking these hints and going ahead, let's have a step ahead. This is another paragraph, the 2.5 from the new Annex 1, where there is an important list of all the different aspects that should be evaluated within the contamination control strategy document. And as you can see here, this is a list that includes, as I already said, many different aspects from, for example, starting from the very beginning, the design of plant and processes. So the very starting, how the facility was designed, how the production areas were designed, and how the, let's say, from a static point of view, how the different areas were designed, were structured and built, and how the these structures leads to different, for example, materials and personnel flows. So how within such areas, personnel and materials are transferred. So the dynamic aspects of the plant design. Premises and equipment, how premises and equipment are designed, maintained, and defined in order to minimize the risk of contamination. Obviously, this is always our point of view. Personnel, how personnel are trained and qualified and supervised by a quality unit. Utilities, raw materials control, all these different aspects. As you can see, there are many different aspects from a quality point of view, engineering point of view, process point of view, and many others. All these aspects, just to give you another important, in my opinion, an important consideration is that the design, the preparation of such a document needs the collection of many different expertises and backgrounds: engineering, microbiology, quality compliance, production. So the author of such a document cannot be a single person, but a team, a multidisciplinary team, where the company gather all the different SMEs from many different departments. As I said, for example, engineering, maintenance, validation, quality control, sterility assurance, of course, and so on. But it is important to stress the fact that even if this is a very long list with many different aspects, I have no overview all the different aspects, but I guess you are doing that, and there are many different aspects. This list is not a comprehensive list. If you go through and in detail in the new Annex 1, you will find that there are many other additional aspects that must be addressed and assessed in the CCS. So This paragraph, the 2.5, is an important starting point, but it's important to keep in mind that this list is not exhaustive. So it must be integrated and improved with other aspects that are specified in the new Annex 1. So going another little step ahead. Now I see I have some hints on how this document should be designed. So what are the main characteristics that this document should have? But going into detail, what it means, or all we have said so far. Let's just make an example. Here is the a flow chart of a sterile process. This is for a lyophilized pharmaceutical products. Just to give you an example, we may have many different examples, but here just to provide you a very quick and I hope clear idea. When we prepare a CCS, a contamination control strategy, first of all, as we already said, we must identify all the risks with an holistic approach to which my process is exposed to. So this is my process, and having a holistic approach, it means that I must consider all the steps of my process as a whole, as a unique system that must be evaluated as a single element. From the very beginning, for example, when I received the materials in my warehouse from my supplier, to the very end, so where the finished product is ready to be delivered. So first of all, identification of the potential contamination risks. So when, where, and how something can go wrong. Where my process and how my process is exposed to particle, microbiological, and the toxin risks. So I should identify all the potential events of contamination that could occur throughout all my process, throughout all the different steps on my process. These are the red arrows. From the other end, my evaluation must take into consideration of what we said, for example, the control and prevention measures in place. So when and how the measures I designed and I put in place can prevent or minimize the occurrence of such a risk. So how, just to speak about colors, how the blue arrows can prevent or minimize the occurrence of the red arrows. And on the other hand, another weapon I have are the monitoring systems. Monitoring systems, as we clearly understand, are not meant to prevent or minimize the occurrence of such risks, but they can detect them. So from the other end, I can minimize and prevent the occurrence of decontamination events with the control and prevention measure. And on the other hand, I can readily, as much as possible, detect them in case they actually occurred. So in this view of many different differentially colored arrows, the answer to which the contamination control strategy document should provide an answer is, in this case, who wins, the red arrows or the green and blue arrows? So translated to a more structured answer, my contamination control strategy that is composed of all the control and monitoring measure is actually effective in minimize and contain all the occurrence of all the contamination, potentially occurring contamination events. And in case the answer is no, because at some specific step of my process, some potential contamination events are not effectively contained, effectively minimized. How I can improve my contamination control strategy to get a full compliance and a full optimization of the containment strategy. So to do this, we, as already said, we must apply a science-based and a risk-based approach to analyze all the risks, evaluate their impact, and evaluate the effectiveness of my mitigation strategy. Of course, as highly emphasized by the new Annex 1, risk assessment principles are a key step for this evaluation. This study, this assessment exercise should take at least in account these aspects as a starting point. So the sources of contamination, which can be the most likely sources of contamination, and the nature of contamination, because it is strictly linked, the nature of my microbial, endotoxin, and particle contamination is strictly linked to the sources. So the aspects that can constitute a potential risk for my product, for my process, and the nature is strictly related to the roots of contamination and their impact on my processes. So it is very important to, in the very beginning, to define and focus on the nature of the contamination risks, and then we must evaluate the potential impact on products, areas, equipment, processes, all the different aspects that constitute my sterile manufacturing processes, and how they are currently mitigated, contained, and detected on the basis of all the control and monitoring measures I have in place, procedural, design, and many other aspects, as already said. And in case it is needed, how I can identify the most appropriate corrective and preventive actions to put in place to mitigate the risk and optimize my contamination control strategy. So the very start point is a global and holistically based risk assessment exercise, taking into consideration anyway that an holistic approach means also that the document will have a very high level structure. So it is important to find the best balance point between go into details and provide a high level overview of all the process. It is very important, in my opinion, also because we must take into consideration that in the future perspective, the contamination control strategy document will have to be meant for external readers. It is very likely that it will be requested by auditors, by inspectors, and clients. So by persons that potentially know very few about your facility, your processes, and so on. So from this point of view, the CCS must provide them a clear and detailed overview of all your facility. So it is important from this point of view to find, as I said, the right balance point between going to details and provide a general overview. But going into detail, what should be fully described and evaluated in the contamination control strategy? First of all, as already said, my facility. So the layout and design of all the different areas that are involved at different levels in the production: warehouses, production departments, quality control laboratories, and so on, utilities system areas, and so on. The material and personal flows, as we said, from one end, I have the static consideration of the facility. It means the layout and the general design. And from the other end, I have the dynamic evaluation of the facility, materials and personal flows. So how materials are transferred through the different areas, how personnel are transferred, are moved through the different areas. And on the other end, how my processes, my sterile processes are structured, as we saw in the previous slide, the different steps, all the different steps that composed my sterile processes, and the products, which are the main features of my products in terms of sterility assurance and exposure to contamination risks. And of course, as we already said, the measuring planes, how I am currently protecting the areas, the flows, and the process and the products. And as already said, the identification of the corrective and preventive action and how I am intended to verify their effectiveness. So it is also important to keep in mind that the effectiveness verification is a key point of the contamination control strategy. How is my current contamination control strategy in terms of effectiveness, and how it will be after the implementation of new corrective and preventive actions in terms of their future effectiveness. So from this point of view, this is here I'm describing you not in absolute sense the right way to prepare and to design the contamination control strategy. This is my opinion based on my experience, based on my sharing of ideas with some of the authors of the new Annex 1, some of the members of the committee that design and prepare the new Annex 1 draft. And this is, in my opinion, the best way to design this document. Taking into collecting all the different aspects and things we talked about so far, in our opinion, the contamination control strategy should be composed of two main parts that are the contamination control strategy document as itself, where I described my facility, my sterile process in place, and all my control monitoring system in place. So everything, all the different measures that composed my contamination control strategy as a whole. And from the other end, a risk assessment exercise throughout all my process to verify the effectiveness of the contamination control strategy, the effectiveness of all the different control and monitoring measures in place to minimize all the different potential contamination risks that can have an impact on my process. So from this point of view, we have a single document that is composed of three different parts: the document as itself and the risk assessment. The contamination controls document, the first part, it should be a document where I describe the state of art of my prevention and contamination controls. So it should contain an overview of the process and products. So what I do in my facility and how. The approach that applies for the contamination risk assessment that we will see later as the second part of the document. The critical control points that I have identified and how I evaluate them. The contamination risk assessment results. So here is my facility, here are my processes in place, here is how I mitigate the risk of contamination, And here is the result of the effectiveness check I perform with the risk assessment exercise. And in case, here are the corrective and preventive action I need to put in place to implement to optimize my contamination control strategy as a whole. And in the final part of this document, I should foresee the modalities for the periodic and the extraordinary review of the documents. As we already said, it is a living document that should be periodically reviewed and re-verified. And how I will verify and monitor the effectiveness of the contamination control strategy. So which will be the KPIs I put in place to periodically review and monitor the actual effectiveness of my contamination control strategy. And here is the list of the critical points we already saw that are listed in the new Annex 1 at paragraph 2.5. And as we already said, we must keep in mind that this list is very long and composed of many different aspects that should be evaluated. So it is an important aspect because it is one of the most challenging aspects in designing a contamination control strategy document. The second part, the risk assessment study, also in this case, here I propose you one option. It is not the only one option, but in my opinion, in our opinion, is the best, or at least the most appropriate to evaluate such a complex system as a sterile process as a whole. For example, from this point of view, an FMEA approach can be applied. Obviously, taking into consideration the three main risk parameters that are foreseen in the FMEA approach: severity as the impact of the potential failures, the occurrence, so the likelihood of potential failure, and the detection, how I can detect. So the first step is the identification of all the different failure events that can happen during the activities of my manufacturing process. That is all the red arrows we saw in the previous slide. Taking into consideration all the different aspects from raw materials and product contamination, product container contamination, closure contamination, the environmental contamination. So they are different classes of contamination events that can have different severities, different occurrence, and different detection system. So it is important also to not only list of the different potential contamination events, but also their features, their characteristics. The second step is to identify the potential root cause. What leads to the failure events, to the contamination events, because it is strictly related to the severity, the occurrence, and the detection. From this point of view, it is important, to take into consideration that, for example, the occurrence parameter is strictly related. The evaluation of the occurrence, it means the likelihood of occurrence of a contamination event, is strictly related to my control measure. So how I prevent the occurrence of such an event, how I can protect my process step from the occurrence of such event. So the occurrence can be a first evaluation of the effectiveness of my control system in place, and the detection can be an evaluation of the effectiveness of my monitoring system. How readily, how effectively I can detect such an event in case of its occurrence. So here, ranking a score for the severity of the event, its occurrence, and its detection, I'm already evaluating the effectiveness of the control monitoring measures I have in place. Then I go through the final risk index calculation. Then I can define simply a different risk index level based on the most appropriate risk control approach I want to apply. What should be done in case of different risk levels? Do I need the implementation of further corrective or preventive actions, or this level of risks can be accepted? So, as a final consideration, it is quite evident that it is a big challenge for a sterile manufacturer, because it is a very complex system to be evaluated and managed, and there are many different aspects that must be taken into consideration, and many different expertise and experience backgrounds that must be collected to answer to all these questions. But from the other hand, it is important to keep in mind that such an exercise will lead me to have a deeper and more critical knowledge of my processes. Through this evaluation, through this assessment, I am forced to have a deep knowledge of all the strong points and all the weak points of the protection, about the protection of my sterile process in place. So to know how I'm working effectively and when I'm not. To be aware of all the in-place control and prevention systems. So all the different aspects my contamination control strategy is composed of. It is a huge amount of expertise that can be collected and reviewed internally in a sterile manufacturing company that can improve the awareness of all the different departments, and should better enable you to identify the current gaps in terms of lack of protection of the sterile processes. So the completion of this exercise, the preparation of the contamination control strategy, can wholly improve the knowledge of your processes and the awareness of all the risks and the weak points you are exposed to. It is an important improvement also in the perspective of a regulatory inspection and audits. So thank you for your attention. I hope my presentation has been clear and comprehensive, and it addressed all your doubts and clarification. But anyway, I'm here for a few minutes, still disposable for some questions if you have one. I just want to stress very quickly that the PQE is supporting sterile manufacturers in the design of contamination control strategy and many other aspects that are related to sterility assurance and the compliance with the new Annex 1 all over the world. Personally, I have supervised many different projects related to sterility assurance, new Annex 1 and contamination control strategy, not only in pharmaceutical companies, but also in medical devices, biotech companies, API production, and also non-sterile production. We have developed a very effective system to support companies in these activities. Also, we are very present in the Asian countries, in supporting activities like, for example, engineering and compliance activities, and also for technical qualification activities.
Thank you, Alessio. So we have a few minutes, as mentioned, and thanks to Tina for helping us to get Alessio to join us today. And she's got a question, which is on behalf of everyone, I think. Do you have any advice for the companies to implement or assess during this period of implementation phase of Annex 1?
Well, I think that based on it depends on the compliance level of a company. I think that a very starting point can be to perform a gap assessment versus the new Annex 1, since it contains a lot of many different new requirements. It is important to go into details and verify the compliance level of a company through towards the new requirements. So this can be the very starting point, and then define a remediation plan to get full compliance with the new Annex 1. It is an important point to understand the deadline to get full compliance with the new Annex 1 is the August of 2023. So the companies have time to define a remediation plan, even in details, even if it is challenging. So it is a good opportunity to do such an exercise to get full compliance, and to take into consideration that, for example, for contamination control strategy, a lot of different expertise, more than before, must be present in the company. So they are strictly required to have important expertise about microbiology, about the process, about the risk management principles. So this remediation plan should include also the collecting and the acquiring of such expertise.
Thank you very much. Now, Septina asks the question, for contamination risk assessment, is it okay to just use an existing tools such as FMEA method, or for the requirement in Annex 1 must be used some specific method?
No. There are no specific requirements from this point of view. I propose FMEA because in my experience, in my opinion, since you have to evaluate a very complex system, FMEA can be the most appropriate from this point of view. But anyway, you are free to use the tool you prepare or the tool you better master. In my opinion, the key point is that the assessment exercise that you performed should be the most objective, the most transparent, to be supported of all the data and evidence you can collect. And so the most appropriate tool that you can justify in front of an inspector, for example, or of an auditor. So from this point of view, the tool that you better master is the best choice.
Thank you. Good question. And a follow-up question, how is the method to evaluate the effectiveness of the control or prevention measure that we define to minimize risk of contamination?
Well, the very first level is the risk assessment, because there you can go into detail and evaluate all the control measures you have in place to minimize it, because you can focus on all the different potential contamination events that can occur, and you can evaluate if you have an effective measure in place to prevent that specific events, event by event. But it is a theoretical exercise, so you cannot be sure totally that your final answer is the most correct one. It is important so to evaluate the effectiveness in an ongoing exercise. And to do that, you should define, as I already said during the presentation, the KPIs. So which are the key parameters that I identify and that can give me feedbacks about the effectiveness of the different measures I put in place. Usually, the activities related to a sterile manufacturing process generates a huge amount of data, monitoring data. The process as itself, the environmental monitoring, for example, and many other aspects. So you have a huge amount of data. You can evaluate the effectiveness of the contamination control strategy ongoing. What it is important and strictly required that you in your company is present the right expertise to critically review and analyze all this data to gain, to find the right feedback about the effectiveness. So from one end, you have the data, but you must have the expertise, the SMEs that can identify the most appropriate KPIs and the most appropriate modality to analyze and evaluate all this data to have this answer.
Thank you. Does anyone have one final question to ask? This is your last chance to ask Alessio live. You can also unmute yourself if you'd like to speak instead. No? Okay, well, it's almost 6:30 on the dot here in Singapore. I'd like to thank Alessio for sharing his part of his morning with us, and to you audience for joining us this evening. Wishing everyone a great day ahead or evening ahead, and to look forward to you joining us in our future sessions. Alessio, thank you very much for your time. And if any questions that anyone has or wants to ask later, please get in touch with us and we will forward that on. In the meantime, we've recorded this session and it will be saved in our ISPE Singapore affiliate YouTube page, so you can watch it later if there's anything that you missed. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone and wish you a great rest of day.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye to everybody.
Bye-bye.